In this video, we'll be looking at question 3.2 from 5CO02. You should have read the scenario and know that this question is asking you to approach how people practices add value in the case study and how you might measure that impact in practical terms. Just to be clear, this guidance shows you the methodology and approach, but you're responsible for the actual content, research, and conclusions. With that said, let's walk through how to approach this step by step. All right, first up, understanding the question. You'll want to start by picking out the command verbs in the question, like explain or identify. These are your clues about what you actually need to do. For this one, the question isn't just looking for a description, it's asking for an analysis. How do people practices create value in the organization, and how can you measure that impact? So it's not enough to just say what people practices are. You've got to define what value means and what impact means, specifically in the context of people practices. Make sure you focus only on value creation and measurement. Don't get sidetracked with unrelated details. Now, let's talk about moving beyond just describing things. This is crucial. You need to dig into the effectiveness and relevance of people practices in the case study's context. Think about short-term and long-term impacts, both positive and negative, and whether those impacts are direct or indirect. Use evaluative language, so weigh up the pros and cons, and back up your points with logical reasoning. For example, you might want to reflect on how traditional, paper-driven systems could limit value, and how switching to more evidence-based approaches might bring real benefits to the organization. When you're planning your answer, here's a structure you can use. Start with a brief rationale. Why do value-added people practices matter for the organization's growth and modernization? Then, split your main analysis into two parts. First, explain how people practices can add value, drawing on both the scenario and any relevant research. Second, look at two strong methods for measuring their impact. Try to allocate about half your answer to each section. Finish with a concise conclusion that pulls everything together. Why does evidence-based measurement matter for ongoing improvement? And remember, each paragraph should have a clear point, some supporting evidence, and a link back to the needs of the organization. Don't forget to use the assessment criteria as your guide. These criteria usually ask you to cover things like the definitions and concepts of value and impact, short-term and long-term effects, both positive and negative consequences, and different ways to measure impact. You'll want to show that you get why measuring people practice matters. Think about justifying investment, making sure objectives are met, and enabling better decision-making. Organize your answer around these themes to make sure you're covering everything you need for a high mark. When it comes to theories, models, and methods, pick the most relevant frameworks for measuring impact. For example, you could talk about cost-benefit analysis or return on investment, often called ROI. Explain how these could be applied in the organization's context. You might also mention practical tools like staff surveys or tracking absence data, and consider what would actually work in a paper-based environment that's moving towards evidence-based practice. The key is to keep your discussion focused and directly tied to the methods mentioned in the assessment criteria. For your sources, you'll need to draw on 2 or 3 high-quality, up-to-date academic sources that talk about value creation and impact measurement in people practice. Paraphrase the key points and use Harvard in-text citations to back up your arguments. Make sure each reference is supporting a specific analytical point. At the end, build a reference list following Harvard guidelines and check your assignment brief for any word count exclusions for references. As you connect theory to the scenario, anchor your analysis in the details from the case study. Reference things like the organization's growth, traditional management style, or current paper-driven practices. Explain why these examples show there's a need for modern people practices and solid ways to measure their impact. This shows you can actually apply theory to real-world situations. If you're aiming for top marks, focus on depth over breadth. Analyze key points thoroughly instead of just listing lots of ideas. Use sources and scenario details that are directly relevant and build logical, evidence-based arguments. It's also important to acknowledge any complexities, like resistance to change, and offer well-supported conclusions that show you're thinking critically. Finally, write clearly and concisely. Be selective and precise with your language. Every sentence should have a purpose. Avoid repeating yourself or adding unnecessary details. Structure your answer so each paragraph moves your argument forward logically. And always review your work for clarity and flow, making sure you stay within the word limit. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, please hit like and subscribe. Check out the rest of this series for more tips on tackling your assignments and building your confidence with assessment methodology.